When we were 13, Monty and I created Watermelon Head. We were originally trying to make a scarecrow, but we quickly realized we didn't have the things we needed, so we did the next best thing. We stuffed some old pillows in one of Monty's dad's flannel shirts, and then did the same to a pair of my mom's old sweatpants. And then we duct taped the two together and stuffed some old fabric scraps in the sleeves of the shirt, duct taped those shut, blew up some latex gloves and attached those to the end of the sleeves. Then, we took some old socks, filled those with sand, and taped them to the bottom on the pants legs. All that was missing was a head. Monty ended up stealing a watermelon that his mom had picked up while grocery shopping and drew two big round eyes, a nose, and a sideways D for the mouth. He added a line straight across the top of the mouth for some teeth, and two small humps at the bottom for a tongue. We dragged Watermelon Head's body into our treehouse and propped him up against a corner, balancing the watermelon on top of the shirt. Watermelon Man became an important part of our lives for a while that summer and helped us with our incredibly important decisions like what kind of candy we should buy at the liquor store that week, or whose turn it was to throw away all the trash in the treehouse. Of course, being kids, we got over it rather quickly, and after about a week and a half, we moved on to more important things. At this point, the watermelon had started to rot, and so we carried Watermelon Head down the treehouse and a few feet out into the woods, where we laid him down in the dirt and placed some flowers and grass around him. We said goodbye and left, forgetting all about him. And then the rumors started. Rose McGlee, who had bullied Monty since kindergarten and gave him the nickname Mount Monty because of Monty's weight, claimed that a man with a watermelon for a head had followed her home from school. She claimed that he had almost caught her, but had only managed to grab her hair, pulling a chunk of it out of her scalp. I think many of the kids believed her because she was Rose McGlee, and she was missing a chunk of hair from the back of her head. She cried about it for weeks to anyone within earshot, whining about her beautiful blonde hair. After a couple of days, everyone seemed to forget about Watermelon Head and Rosie's run-in with him. And then the rumors started up again. Cooper Brown encountered Watermelon Head next. Cooper was, in general, an okay person, although I did hold a slight grudge against him ever since he stuck grape-flavored bubblegum in my hair in 3rd grade, which ended with my mom having to cut about 4 inches of my hair off. According to Cooper, Watermelon Head had come out of the woods after soccer practice while he was waiting for his mom to pick him up. Cooper said he tried to run, but he was surprisingly fast, even though he hadn't been wearing any shoes. Cooper had managed to get away by throwing his soccer ball at him, which distracted him. After that, all the kids in our school could talk about was Watermelon Head. The day after we found out what happened to Cooper, Monty and I went back to the woods into the area where we had left Watermelon Head to see if he was still there. When we got there, however, he was gone. All of the dried up flowers were still scattered around the ground, but there was no sign of Watermelon Head. "Should we tell somebody?" I asked as we stared at the empty ground where he once lay.
Are you crazy, Anna? We'll get in trouble for what happened to Rose and Cooper. Plus, I don't think they'll believe us.
Monty replied. I knew he was right. We were 13, not stupid. We knew that if we told people that we had created Watermelon Head, we would either get in trouble or made fun of, neither of which sounded like great outcomes. So we kept our secret. Every week or so, a different kid would have a new story to tell about Watermelon Head, but we realized fairly quickly that some of them were made up. Most of the kids couldn't seem to agree on what Watermelon Head looked like. Rose and Cooper had given similar descriptions, but as the stories continued, the details changed. Someone claimed that he was wearing a trench coat. Somebody else said his body was made of vines. Some said his fingers were made of rusty knives, and someone said one of his feet was missing and he walked around with a limp, dragging a bloody stump behind him. Monty and I kept a list of all the kids who had seen the real Watermelon Head, based on their descriptions of him, and it was Monty who figured out who Watermelon Head was targeting.
Bullies.
He said one day as we laid on the floor of the treehouse. What?
Watermelon Head is going after bullies, or people who have bullied us.
When I thought about it, I realized that Monty was right. All the kids who had seen our Watermelon Head, the real Watermelon Head, had, at one point or another, made fun of us. So does he think he's protecting us? I asked. Monty sat up and shrugged. What do you think he would have done if he had caught Rose, or Cooper, or any of them? Monty shrugged again.
Maybe he wants to kill them.
I don't want them to die. I sat up and looked at Monty.
Well, neither do I. But what are we supposed to do about it? We don't even know where Watermelon Head is.
We brainstormed for a few hours that day, thinking of ways to stop Watermelon Head. The most obvious solution was to take him apart, but we weren't sure if we would succeed. Of course, we also had to find him first, and we had no idea how to do that either. We went home for lunch that day and met back at the treehouse afterwards to keep discussing our plan. When we got up into the treehouse, we noticed a dirty cardboard box sitting in the middle of the floor. Monty walked over to it and opened it, picking it up and walking over to show me the contents of the box. There was a long chunk of blonde hair in there, along with a deflated soccer ball and the initial CB written on one of the white hexagons in red marker. We sped up our planning, decided to go out and look for Watermelon Head the next morning. However, that same night, we found him, or rather, he found us. I remember it vividly. I woke up in the middle of the night to excessive noise coming from downstairs. I quietly got out of bed and tiptoed to the top of the stairs and looked down the side of the railing, but I couldn't see much. The house was dark, except for the light that came from the kitchen. I crept down the stairs as I heard glass breaking and a moan. I pressed my back up against the wall and slowly made my way towards the kitchen. One of the wooden chairs was in the entryway, lying on its side, and the back door was open. I poked my head around the wall and looked into the kitchen, where I saw my mom sitting behind the kitchen table, which was knocked over, using it as a shield. I was about to call out to her, but she saw me and pressed a finger to her lips, her eyes wide with fear. It was the first time I had seen my mom look so scared, so I froze in place and nodded slowly. There was another loud crash, and I kept my eyes on my mom as she winced. There were a few seconds of silence, and my mom pointed to something off to the side. I took a step forward to get a better look and noticed she was pointing at the phone. I reached over and grabbed it, and my mom held up her hands, putting up 9 fingers, then 1, and then 1 again. I nodded and looked down at the phone as a tear fell off my chin and onto the number 5, and that's when I realized I had been crying. I wiped my cheeks and pressed the talk button, followed by the 9, the 1, and another 1.
No!
My mom shouted. Startled, I dropped the phone and looked up to see Watermelon Head standing in front of me. He was gigantic. The top of his watermelon head was no longer rotting, and it brushed up against the top of the entryway. His drawn-on features didn't move, and he stared at me with his big, slightly crooked eyes and this huge, permanent smile. His torso and arms were still thickly stuffed, as were his legs, but his hands seemed to have taken the shape of actual hands, and there were no longer 2 white, blown-up gloves. I looked down at the gray sweatpants he wore, which were dirty with mud and what appeared to be dried-up blood. His feet, like his hands, seemed to have taken the shape of human feet, allowing him to walk with ease. He stretched his foot out and kicked the phone into the kitchen. Then he reached a hand out towards me, and I wanted to back away and run, but I was frozen in fear. Suddenly, there was a thump, and he turned around. My mom had stuck a knife in the back of his watermelon head.
Run, Anna! Call the police!
She shouted as she kept her eyes on Watermelon Head. I snapped out of my trance and took off down the hall and back upstairs. I didn't know where to go, but there was another phone in my parents' room, so I ran in there and locked the door behind me. I dove onto the bed and grabbed the phone off the nightstand. When I picked it up, instead of a dial tone, I heard my mom's screams. I listened as there were more crashing sounds, followed by grunts as my mom attempted to fight back. Finally, there was a gasp, followed by complete silence. I jumped up off the bed and ran to the door, pressing my ear up against it. I could hear Watermelon Head coming up the stairs, and I held my breath, looking for a way to escape. I looked over at the bedroom window, but I was on the second floor. There was no way I could safely escape. As I stood there, listening to Watermelon Man's footsteps get closer, I started to cry. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably a few seconds before I heard the sirens getting closer. They seemed to scare off Watermelon Head, whose footsteps retreated down the stairs. The police arrived and found me crying in my parents' room, and my parents dead downstairs in the kitchen. One of the neighbors had heard the commotion and called the police. I remember telling them what happened, crying as I confessed to creating Watermelon Man and telling them I never meant for him to go after my classmates or my parents. The officers tried to calm me down for a bit while they periodically walked a few feet away and whispered to each other. They kept me upstairs in my parents' room, and eventually, another woman came up. She wasn't wearing a cop uniform, and I know now that she was a child psychologist who had been called to give me an evaluation. She had asked me to draw Watermelon Head and asked me again and again if I was sure I had seen him kill my parents. It took me a few minutes to realize that she didn't believe me. None of them did. I sat on my parents' bed and realized that Monty was right. No one was going to believe us. When the woman came back, I told her that I was wrong, that I hadn't actually seen Watermelon Head, and that he was just a rumor that the kids in my grade had made up. I told her that I had been having nightmares about Watermelon Head, and that I must have been having one that night, and confused it with what had happened. I told her I didn't see who had killed my parents. Shortly after, I was sent to live with my aunts in a different state. I never got to say goodbye to Monty, but my aunts let me talk to him on the phone every day. I immediately told Monty the truth, that Watermelon Head had attacked and killed my parents. I told him to be careful. I didn't want the same thing to happen to him. And it didn't. After that night, Watermelon Head vanished, and there were no more stories of him following kids home. I spent a few years in therapy, coming to terms with the fact that Watermelon Head wasn't real. I said it so often I almost believed it sometimes. Almost. I had put that part of my life behind me, and I thought it was all over. Last night, however, my twin boys woke me up in tears, telling me that they had seen a man with a watermelon head staring at them through their bedroom window. After I calmed them down and made sure the curtains were fully closed, I opened up my laptop and checked the security camera footage. I skipped through the video and stopped a few minutes before the twins had woken up. As I watched the footage, my heart sank. There he was, walking across the lawn, and pausing to wave at the camera before standing outside my boy's window and knocking. Watermelon Head.